Okay, I think we're ready to start the meeting. I'd like to call this meeting to order. The time is 9:18 on July 13th. Tom Battaglia will not be attending today's meeting. Rosie, do we have a quorum?
Yes, Madam Chair, we do have a quorum with also the member Paul Lotes being absent. I apologize, as well as Thomas Battaglia.
Okay, thank you. I just want to remind everybody that when we're voting on action items, please use the board voting system when making a motion and providing a second to a motion and when voting on all motions. Rosie, do we have any public comment today?
No, Madam Chair, we do not have any public comment for today.
All right, moving right into these action items, Johnny. Staff's recommendation to amend board rules and policies.
Morning, Bobby. Thank you. Good morning, committee members. As a best practice, this committee, as well as your staff, review all of your governance documents at least once every 3 years, and the next slide is before you. You can see there's a lot of policies up there. We provided a written report on those recommendations as well as the red lines that you could look through. I do want to highlight two more substantive changes. First one is Rule 8.50C, which concerns re-examining a disabled retiree. Part of our process for all three of our plans is to make sure that a disabled retiree continues to be eligible through prior to any age eligibility for service retirement or normal age. Currently, the board rule says if this board determines that that disabled retiree is no longer eligible for a benefit, we'll take away that benefit, but we'll give them 30 more days. I believe that that's not a general practice amongst retirement systems in general. If you don't qualify for a benefit, that disqualification should happen at that determination. I understand the rule was there for purposes of preparing the member for that loss of benefits, but this process, if you have been through it, can take a long time, generally over a year, from notice of reexamination to the hearings to coming back before the board, and I think that's a significant amount of time and notice for the possible loss of benefits. So I'm recommending that change. The second change that staff is recommending relates to the city's decision, a new decision, agreement amongst their recognized unions to pay for any interest associated with a correction to a retirees or active members' benefit or contributions and the associated interest. So the city has decided to pay that associated interest when the correction is caused by a city employee, the city's fault or SDCERS' fault. Our general policy has reflected IRS guidelines and our fiduciary law, which is we need to follow the plan. So if there is an error, we need to correct it. And part of that correction is collecting the right amount of contributions, paying out the right amount of benefits, and if we error on that, to collect any of that overpayment or repair that, follow that plan better, which includes the interest. So we would just like to reflect the board's under and overpayment policies for contributions and overpayment of benefits to reflect the city's decision. Any questions about that? Otherwise, we do need a vote.
Yeah. Bobby, did I ask a few questions, or do you have questions?
I have a question.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I can wait for the chair.
I don't know exactly where it is in the document, but there's the process when a member has an attorney speak and present, and they're limited to up to 3 minutes, or they're allowed up 3 minutes, and then there's a rebuttal by SDCERS counsel, and then I think the response says that the member's attorney has 1 minute to reply. Just based on some of these instances, I thought that the one minute is very limiting, because on occasion the SDCERS council certainly has more than 1 minute, And it seemed to me that even if you changed it to at least 1 minute, that would allow the members' council to have a longer period of time if necessary.
Thank you for that comment. I'm trying to find it as well. I thought it was at least 1 minute. I could be wrong, though, but if that is true, then I think your suggestion is appropriate. If you'd like it to be at least 1 minute. Would you give me,
Whatever the language is that would, if necessary, allow the members' council to extend beyond 1 minute. Whatever you think is appropriate.
let me find that language again, and then
So how should,
I can fix that real quick.
okay. Right.
Thank you, then.
Thanks. Johnny, I have actually 4 questions on this. First question has to do with Rule 8.0, and it talks about periodic physical examination of any member. Well, let me put this another way. San Diego Municipal Code sections, and it cites them, require that the board prescribe rules and regulations for an annual filing of the affidavit of condition of disability and periodic physical examination of any member actively receiving a disability retirement benefit. And yeah, it goes on to talk about that in our guiding documents and so forth, that we're required to have a policy in that regard. Do we have a policy in that regard?
An internal procedure?
Internal? No. If I'm reading the municipal code correctly, it's saying we, SDCERS, are required to have a policy that specifies a process for periodic physical examination of any member. I'm asking, in SDCERS policies, do we have such a policy?
Sure. Well, we have our board rules, which is voted on by the board, and so what you're seeing is our process for re-examining someone, which includes this process of examining them medically. And then further in that, we do have our procedures with our staff of how that process goes forward.
Okay, then maybe I should ask, could you give me an example of a circumstance in which we would ask for a re-examination?
Yes, I'll give you my example, and then I might call a helpline to the Sandra Clausen, who actually does the process.
Sure.
All 3 plans require us to only pay benefits, disability benefits, to those who continue to be disabled. And so, by law, as part of our duty, we need to reach out to these individuals and get some information on them. Has your circumstances changed? Are you able to do the job you used to not do? Those are those annual affidavits.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding is if we receive an affidavit that gives information that is contrary or supports the concept that this person may be able to go back to work, then we would look into that more deeply. And part of that deeper look would be whether or not this person should receive a re-examination, a medical examination, to determine whether a physician thinks that the person could possibly go back to work. And if that's the case, then we would, staff would bring that issue to the board, and the board would decide whether or not to send that retiree to a medical doctor for examination.
So basically what we're talking about is a person files their affidavit and our staff looks at that affidavit and says, we need to look further into this or whatever.
Yes.
But I don't think that is a periodic physical examination.
Yeah, I don't think it's periodic, no.
Okay. Well, all I'm saying is that the municipal code requires that we do that, if I'm reading it correctly, and that's why I was asking.
Yes, Sandra.
Come in, Sandra.
Actually, the requirement under the municipal code is that the board create rules and process for that to happen. It's not requiring that we have any specific process for examining everybody so many years or taking some certain population. It's up to the board to determine how they want to perform those periodic physical exams. And the board has determined that they would only require a physical exam if there's evidence that the individual is no longer incapacitated.
Okay. I don't read the municipal code to envision a process like that, the way I read it. So if you wouldn't mind taking a look at that at some point, I'd appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thanks. On 8.70, 8.70A1, and this talks about the disability the disability committee making a decision.
Yes.
Would it be, should we be saying there on those 4 options that it's a recommendation to the board? In other words, that the disability committee doesn't have the authority to make that decision unilaterally, rather they're making a motion to recommend to the board to do those, I think, 4 things.
That's always been the case with all of our standing committees. They don't have any power to make those decisions. Those are all a recommendation to the board. So if you looked at our committee's charter, it would say that. I do see your point here, and that one could think that it would be the committee that makes it, but I read this body, this governance documents as a whole to clearly understand that these are recommendations to the board, and the board makes that decision.
Okay. And then last one is 8.9.5. This is a really sensitive one where it talks about a person, I think, with a mental disability. And it talks about restricting, in some cases, sharing the, I guess, psychiatrist's opinions such that the employee or the retiree or whoever it is, the subject of that, doesn't actually receive them, but they're shared with the attorney for that person. Could you just explain how we're able to do that? In other words, if you're the subject of this whole thing, as the retiree or whatever, and a decision has been reached, how is it that we can tell the subject retiree or whatever, you can't see this? And also, if we say that we can share it with the attorney for that person, is that attorney, through an attorney-client relationship, not obligated to share it anyway?
Okay, thank you for bringing this up. As you pointed out, this is a sensitive area. There are psychiatric reports where the medical professional has said it could be a danger to give these diagnoses as information to the patient. And SDCERS is caught in a situation where we want to, of course, protect our members and respect that opinion of that medical expert. At the same time, at issue oftentimes is this mental condition. So we are, as a system, we are in the position of trying to give due process to the member, which is give them the information they need and to obtain their disability retirement, but also protect that member. And so this rule addresses that. It addresses that staff should not be giving those documents directly to that member because of the doctor's wishes. If we have that situation, we reach out to that physician and say, can we give it to them? And if the doctor says yes, then we will. If the doctor says no, then we won't. And then it's then incumbent upon the patient to say, well, if I need these records, then they should go and get a court order that allows us to do that. So that way we have done everything we can do to try to take care of our member.
Okay.
In terms of giving that information to their attorney, that is that attorney's relationship with that member. And so we want to give that attorney who's helping that member everything that we have so they can represent their client the best way. Their decision to work with their client and share what they have, that's their relationship. It's outside of what I can do or should do in advising and protecting that member.
So just to be clear, and I'm not looking at it right now. So in this case, it's a doctor who is hired by us, who's paid by us to do the evaluation?
Usually not.
Oh,
Usually not.
then who would be,
It could just be a treating physician for the member prior to examination of this member, but it possibly could be one of our doctors.
so, go ahead.
I could say, is it possible it could be both? Because
Sure.
the member is required to provide medical evidence of their disability. And then generally, we test the veracity of those claims with our own independent expert. So again, it's very rare that the SDCERS Disability Committee and Board address mental conditions, because most of what we're limited to is orthopedic, but there are some very special instances where we may have to look at mental conditions. Please do.
And I'm looking to Sandra to correct me if I'm wrong on this, but generally my understanding is when we ask for medical records, we ask for all medical records, and we get reams and reams of medical records. So we don't ask the doctor to exclude things that may or may not be related to the disability of the member. We ask for everything. So there could be that there's psychiatric records in there, but we're not necessarily asking for them. We're asking for everything. Correct, Sandra? I get a thumbs up on that one.
Thank you. That's it for me. It just sounded to me like in Bobby's concern that if that opposing attorney were given equal time, it would maybe address your concern.
So,
You
Bobby,
know,
I found
actually-
it.
It does say at least 1 minute, so I take it back. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
So with that, I need a motion to approve. In a second. Paul moved it and Michelle seconded it, so let's vote.
And with all votes in, Madam Chair, this motion passes 4-0.
Great. Well, that's it for our action items. Moving on to Greg's information item on training opportunities. And we're all going to Stanford, right?
I hope so. Thank you. As everybody knows, SDCERS is a financial institution responsible for administering the defined benefits for its 3 plan sponsors, the city, the port, and the airport, for approximately 25,000 employees and retirees, with the scope of responsibility of ensuring the safety, integrity, and growth of its $10 billion investment portfolio, along with accurately and timely paying over $635 million annually in retirement benefits to its retirees and beneficiaries. And as the board is responsible for setting organizational policy, it's imperative that the board seeks education and stay abreast of best practices in public pension plan governance, leadership, operations oversight, and institutional investment. At our April 2023 board retreat, the board requested staff to investigate adding a board certification training class to SDCERS educational conference list provided by the National Association of Corporate Directors, or NACD. And staff concluded this certification list, which is a self-study course focusing on corporate boards, is worth the investment and should be added to the list. And it is worth the board members' time and trust funds for board members to do so. In looking at this one organization, staff also said, well, that is one way to get this education. Maybe there's other ways to get this education. So we researched a variety of other organizations that provide this. The NACD is a self-study course with a very rigorous exam and CPE requirements. And there's different levels of training which include in-person or online or self-study and different lengths and different scopes of training. And so we found a number of other educational sources that we thought were also appropriate to add to our education list. And so we added those to the education list, which will be on the Friday board's agenda for approval. And This concludes my prepared comments, and I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Are there any that you recommend?
Well, actually, the ones that the board members asked about, the National Association of Corporate Directors, even though it's corporate focused, there are a number of retirement systems that the board members actually do attain that certification, and that does seem to be a very good use of time and resources, so that one is recommended. The NCPERS, which focuses more on public pensions, is also recommended. And the other ones, I don't have as much information on, but they do, at face value, look appropriate.
All right,
Bobby, could I ask a question or two?
sure.
On the first one, if I read it correctly, it requires an annual membership to keep up. Is that the way that works?
Yeah, so for the NACD, there is a membership dues part of that, and then it's about $5,000 to get all the course materials and take the test, and then there's ongoing CPE requirements to keep that. Similar to the NCPERS, you need to be a member of the organization to go to their conferences, and so there's some prerequisite conferences and then attending in-person conferences throughout the year. Fortunately, we're already members of NCPERS, so that is already covered. So that is not common with all of them, but some of them, there are membership requirements.
Thanks. And my only other question is this Stanford one really, really good?
Well, I would recommend perhaps you can be our test case and let us know. With a lot of our educational conferences, we rely upon feedback from our board members to give us knowledge and more information and insight on the applicability of attending.
Well, I would only say that that would be a first in my life that Stanford invited me to a course of instruction. Thank you.
All right, thank you. You know, I'm familiar with the program at University of San Diego, and I think that would be a good one for all of us. I mean, they may even do one for our board.
I went through that program, Bobby. It was excellent.
Yeah, was excellent.
And Bobby, I went to their website, and they had apparently just had a course, and then they didn't have one scheduled in the future. So I guess it's just when they have enough people or something, but there wasn't even at present an opportunity to put your name in saying I'd be interested in the future. So if you hear more about it, I'd love to hear about it.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, well, moving on to reports. Member services, Victoria Fedeliso. Licio, right? Okay.
I press. Good morning. I'm Victoria Fedelizo, the Acting Member Services Director. Just wanted to highlight some of the work that Member Services has been doing over the past few months to ensure positive communication and support for our members. One of our main priorities is member beneficiary designations. We have implemented 3 new correspondences as of June. The first letter that is automatically sent to new and rehired members that do not have primary beneficiaries designated 60 to 90 days after their hire date. The second letter is generated monthly, identifying members who have 1 or more beneficiary designations, but the percentages allocated to each beneficiary do not add up to 100%. Finally, we have a third letter that will be generated at the beginning of each year, sent to all members who do not have a primary beneficiary designation for 1 or more eligible death benefits. Our hope is that these 3 new processes combined will encourage more members to update their beneficiary designations and reduce the risk that their SDCERS death benefits will be paid to their estate. And other good news, Since the last meeting, we have decreased our average call wait time by 35 seconds. It's gratifying to report that this positive trend has continued into June and July, with an average call wait time remaining under a minute. Staff changes. One of our very talented call center representative, Andreas Molina, had recently moved to the disability division. Therefore, we are a man down until we can fill this vacant position. Despite being one less call center representative, the current average call wait time for July stands at 44 seconds. It's still very early in the month to maintain this with one less call center representative, so we're crossing our fingers. Member Services Division has undertaken several initiatives to effectively communicate and support our members. The new correspondences resulted in increased engagement and beneficiary updates. Additionally, the efforts to reduce call wait times has been successful, although recent staffing changes may temporarily impact the average call wait time. But we remain committed to providing the best service to our members. Thank you. Please let me know if you have any questions. You're welcome.
It was interesting to read this past couple of weeks about the wait time that the city has for street lights. Can be up to 3 hours.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I'm very impressed with
Yes.
the call wait time of 30 seconds.
I'm impressed myself.
That's right.
You know, being down one, it obviously does make a difference, but
Right, and it's important. So
Yes.
thank you.
yes, thank you.
All right. Benefits Administration. Marcel.
Good morning. I'm going to provide you update on two areas that are in my report. One is on Prop B, so we continue to work on Prop B. On July 8th of 2022, that was our big push for Phase 2. Those were people who were hired by the city during Prop B and were still employed by the city. So we had about 3,200 members, new members on July 8th that was part of that group. There were some people that were part of that group that had more challenging circumstances. So since then, there's been another 300 from that initial group that have joined SDCERS, and we still are working on probably about 75 to 100 last stragglers. Again, these are people that had complex situations. It was more challenging to do calculations. They may have been out and come back in. For example, going out on LTD, coming back. We have to catch them during a window when they're actively employed for them to join. So there's been some challenges there. But we continue to work on that and anticipate that will be wrapped up fairly soon. We are also seeing some headway now on the Phase 3 group. So this is employees of the city who were hired during Prop B, separated service before July 8th of 2022. We did receive the preliminary report from the city of the data for those members about 2 weeks ago. We did our initial SDCERS review and sent it back to the city with some questions and some comments, and so we're waiting to get that file back. We initially had thought there were going to be about 2,200 people on that list, and it's looking more like about 1,955. So I'm not sure what happened to the rest of them, but we are happy there's a few less people on there. We do anticipate getting that back from the city in the next couple weeks, doing our final SDCERS review, and then we send it off to Chiron. Chiron is going to take about 2 months to review that data and come up with the costing that then would go back to the city for them to disseminate to these former employees with their options on what they want to do if they would like to purchase that time. I've also been working closely with the city on some of those employees who feel they may have reciprocity, and so we've worked through some information on that and been able to provide some cities some direction that based on what was reported by the employee, this person probably would be able to get reciprocity. This employee would not because they have an impermissible overlap or an impermissible gap, but we've been able to provide them some preliminary information. The city has worked very closely with us in letting us review the communications before they go out to the former employees, so it's been very clear. I appreciate the collaboration there. It's been very clear to these former employees that any information they're getting on reciprocity is based solely on what they provided to us, and also making it very clear to them that we can't answer that question definitively until they become a member and we send the information off to the reciprocal agency. So there is some risk there that may or may not happen. So that's the Prop B update. I don't know if there's any questions on that or if you want me to go into the other piece.
Yeah, Marcel, just one question on that. So you noted that some people were able to avoid the deadline for a decision, right? And I was under the impression that that had been negotiated with the unions, and everybody had to decide by a certain date. So I think you explained that somebody might be out on LTE or something like that, and so that created, can you give any other insights into that, how they avoided that decision?
Sure, so there were a couple of pieces. The biggest piece were people that were either out on LTD, FMLA, military leave. Some of them had gone to a position no longer eligible for benefits. They were now an hourly employee, not eligible for benefits. So if they had moved into any of those positions, there's actually provisions in the Muni Code of how it was negotiated with the unions that gives them a new timeline. Now, there are people who should have made a decision back in July and didn't because the city didn't have the data to give them because of other circumstances. Those quite often were people who were employed by the city, they left, they came back. There was one person that left and came back 3 times during the Prop B time. So then the challenge is calculating the cost for that, as well as for the city side, figuring out what's in their SPSBH account. So for those employees, the city has kept the unions advised, and when they do come over, they are being put retroactively into SDCERS as of whatever date they would have been put in based on the Muni Code provisions. And so that retroactive activity is happening. And I know the city has definitely kept the unions updated on this. They're very well aware of who's outstanding and what the issues are.
Thanks. And Bobby, I just wanted to comment that I am just amazed at how our staff has been able to put Humpty Dumpty back together again here without too much drama. I mean, it's an extraordinary job to do this, just, I mean, unbelievably complex. And it seems like from everything I've seen, it's been done with the maximum amount of efficiency possible, and I just wanted to compliment you and everybody who's working on that.
Thank you. The other update I wanted to provide is on the RFP the city issued for retiree health services. So that had an initial deadline of July 7th, which was last Friday. The city has extended that deadline to July 19th. So I think that's a good thing to allow them to get some more bidders in there. I did notice when I went out to the city's website and looked at it, one of the tabs on there is prospective bidders, and there are 24 prospective bidders listed there. So that gave me a lot of hope that this will be a robust process and the city will have some good options on finding a TPA to handle retiree health.
And Marcella, I would note that the retiree organizations worked with the city and were given the option to sit on the evaluation panels.
Correct.
Not with a vote, but it's a nice collaborative process that they have set up, so it's a good thing. Thank you.
And happy to answer any questions anybody has on any other items.
Is that it for your report?
That's it for my report. Thank you.
Well, again, it's really impressive how you and your team have been able to keep track of all of these little pieces
Thank
in
you.
Prop B. So please, yes, give everybody thanks from this committee. We appreciate it. And now we have IT. Michelle.
Good morning. At the May meeting, I introduced Norma Frank as our new Application Services Manager, and she was unfortunately not able to attend that meeting. So I'd like to put a face to the name and give her an introduction today. Norma's present. As the Application Services Manager, she is managing all the enterprise solutions for SDCERS. She's also serves as the project manager for new solutions that we implement. And we are very excited to have her on the SDCERS team, and welcome to the IT division. Thank you. I wanted to also give a shout out to Sean Kilpack, our operations manager, who's celebrating a birthday today. I'd like to take some time discussing the recent data breaches that have occurred related to the software MoveIt. Several of us on the SDCERS team subscribe to notifications from the CISA, which is the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. On a daily basis, we receive anywhere from 1 to a dozen alerts of known vulnerabilities. And just to give you some background, the CISA is a branch of the Homeland Security. Their job is to promote the integrity and cybersecurity programs at other government agencies. So on this daily basis, when we receive these notifications, we review those for the impact to the SDCERS environment. If it's determined that it does impact our environment, we take the recommended CISA remediation. The first alert from the CISA on the Move It product was in early June. And although SDCERS does not use Move It, we still took proactive action to make sure that our data integrity was not impacted by the breach. We reviewed our secure file system software and made sure that all configurations followed the CISA recommendation, in which they did. The bad actors that penetrated the Move It product used SQL injections to take over the database and be able to breach the data. Our SFTP software does not use SQL, and it does not have databases installed on that software. This kind of breach would not be relevant for our solution then. It's not something that could occur or impact our SFTP. We also reached out to our vendors to see what kind of secure protocols they had in place, and none of them used Move It, and none of them were impacted by this data breach. I think there's always lessons learned from events like this. We've started working sessions to review our data breach response. This is a collaborative effort between the IT division and the legal division, specifically Susan St. John, of our privacy officer. We're working on that and seeing if there's a way that if there's lessons learned that we can incorporate into our response plan. This summarizes the actions that we took in relation to the data breach, but I think it's important to highlight the regular practices and procedures that the IT division has in place to mitigate these kind of events. We perform regular patching on all of our devices, which includes the SFTP server. We perform regular vulnerability scans on all servers and desktops. We have weekly penetration testing from an external vendor of all of our external applications. We also have weekly vulnerability scans from the Department of Homeland Security. Annually, we have an external vendor that performs network penetration testing, and this is all very timely as we just received our preliminary report last week. And after extensive testing, the vendor's quote was, SDCERS network is observed as extremely secure, and extremely secure was bolded and underlined. The report included 4 low-impact items. Low impact is defined as findings with minor security risk that does not pose an immediate or short-term danger. 1 of 4 of those findings have already been remediated, and I expect the remaining 3 to be resolved within a short period of time. After remediation, the vendor comes in and will rescan those vulnerabilities to make sure that the solutions we put in place meet the standards. I'm very proud of the result of that penetration testing. This is probably the best outcome we've ever had. And I think it's a testament to the diligence and the commitment to security of our IT team. Lastly, I just want to, on a very different topic, we are working with our audio-video vendor to create an upgrade plan for some of the technologies in this boardroom. Greg is sporting one of the new monitors that we are considering upgrading to. So if you want to take a look at it and give some feedback, if you think it's too small, too big, or too square, we're happy to take that feedback. And at this time, this concludes my updates, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, Michelle, thank you very much. First of all, I have a very high confidence in the security on the SDCERS side. So what you're saying, I'm on board with that. If I'm understanding what happened in the CalSTRS situation, they were using an outside vendor for death matching, right? So if I'm understanding correctly, so that they would not inadvertently continue to pay benefits to someone who had died and they hadn't been notified. And apparently, if I'm reading all the information correctly, they were sharing a lot of sensitive data with that subcontractor, who then subcontracted to move the data back and forth. I guess we have a very limited amount of control when we sub out work like that. in terms of the quality of security that our subcontractor, in other words, we don't have direct control over that. So I wanted to ask a couple of things. First one is, do we have a subcontractor for that same kind of thing, the death matching? And in how many cases or how many entities do we share the full range of our members' information, social security numbers, birth dates, all the rest of those kinds of things? Because it seems to me that no matter how hard we work on our internal security, we don't have ultimate control over what happens with vendors that we bring on board.
I think that's very relevant questions. I think there's two parts, and one part I can address, and then the other part I'm going to pitch over to Marcel to address, that the business needs to outsource that data. When exchanging data with third parties, that's part of the working groups that we're going to have, is wanting to put some criteria and due diligence into making sure we vet out what their security program is and the protocols that they're using for data exchange. I do want to clarify for, I think, the CalPERS, it wasn't a subcontractor to the contractor. I think they were using the Move It product. They were processing the death match processes. So we vet the vendors that we contract with, and then beyond that, that's going to be part of the working groups to see if that data is shared anywhere beyond those vendors that we're contracted to. The need to share data, I'm going to pitch over to Marcel because that's more on a business need, and understanding what that scope of work is.
I'll jump in. We take data protection extremely serious here at SDCERS. Extremely serious at SDCERS. And I would say the number of vendors is very limited, and it's something we don't take lightly. There are just key things that we need to do, such as providing data to the actuary, providing information to our paying agent to make sure that we get payments made, providing data to the vendor that provides tax reporting services, sharing data back and forth from our plan sponsors. So the way we use it is very limited. And I will ask for Marcel's help, because one of the responsibilities we have is only to pay benefits to those that are eligible. And we do have the challenge that when people pass away, we are not always notified timely. And so how do you mitigate that risk of non-notification or late notification? And the vendor, what we call death match, is that a cost benefit? What's the risk of sharing that data versus the risk of making overpayments for an extremely long period of time? The longer the overpayment persists, the ability to collect that overpayment goes down. And so the sooner that you can identify that you should be stopping a payment, the better. And so we did go back and intuitively understood that we believe this is a valuable relationship we have. We should continue to take that risk of transmission of data versus transmission of loss. But Marcel is an amazing statistician. Yeah, and she would like to share some information.
So you all know me, I love my numbers, so I'll try and keep it high level, not get too much into the weeds, but we do use a company called Life Status 360. Before I get into stats, I want to talk a little bit about how we use them. So we actually go to their secure FTP site, and we upload our data to their secure site. They then notify us, from what I'm hearing from staff, pretty much daily, when they have hits against that data. So they send us an email, and the email says, hey, you've got hits. Doesn't tell you who it is. So then our team goes into that secure website once again to find out who the hits are, and then takes that data, looks in our membership data to determine that, yes, that's somebody that is a member and that there has been a death. Right now, about a third of our deaths are reported to us by this third party, and they are the second to last entity reporting to us. So I looked at all of the deaths we'd had in the last year, who reported them to us, and I also looked at when they got reported. And so Most of our deaths, almost 55% of them, are reported by a relative, and that's fairly quickly. Life status is coming in after that. They're coming in after we've had the relative tell us. They're coming in after the plan sponsor has told us if it's an active member. They're even coming in after sometimes we've gotten returned mail, or after we've had, the only thing that's taking longer than life status is an ACH return, where we've tried to pay them and their account is closed. And that makes sense because quite often the account's not immediately closed. So they kind of are our backstop on this. And the fact that they're getting a third, they're the first reporting entity for a third of our deaths is pretty significant. I don't want that to sound like they only report a third of our deaths. Quite often what happens is they're reporting a death to us, staff is pulling and looking at it and saying, yeah, we already knew that one, because it had already been reported by one of these other agencies. The other stat that, this is a new one that Greg didn't know, because I just got another stat. So one of the things I wanted to look at was our risk is, again, not as much with our members. First of all, because our members are pretty aware of what their benefit is and how it works. Of course, once they've died, they aren't doing that, but they've generally shared that. And also quite often, the member has set beneficiaries, whether it is they've named somebody who's going to continue to get an ongoing benefit, or whether they've just named children to get the $2,000 death benefit. So members are easier to get information on. The challenges we have are more with what we call alternate payees, so that's a former spouse being paid, or if it's a continuance, so the member has died and now their widow is being paid. And those are the ones that we seem to have more challenges with, and Life Status does a better job of reporting those. They're getting almost 40% of those. So they're reporting a third of total, but it is skewed for them reporting the ones where we actually have the risk. When there's not an ongoing benefit that's going to happen, as Greg said, the longer we pay that benefit, the more challenging it is to get that money back, because we don't know where it's gone now. It's part of the estate. So we do on a periodic basis, we look at other vendors and make sure that what we're getting from Life Status is a good product. What we have found in the past when we've done parallels, because of course everybody's willing to let you do a parallel, they're all pretty close to the same. When we've done parallels, there have been some that Life Status misses, but then some the other entity misses. And I know that CalPERS was doing that with this company to see if they could get more data from them than they were getting from their other vendors.
Thanks. It's really helpful to understand all those things. I think that, the reality is that there's no guarantees no matter what we do. It sounds much better that we're doing a FTP upload directly to the vendor versus using a third-party data transmission process or whatever, and that's helpful. My only comment would be that and I'm sure you're doing this anyway, is some sort of a risk-benefit analysis of any circumstance in which we're sharing, robust member data, and is there a way to minimize the data so we're not providing them the full date of birth, we're providing the year of birth, or we're offering just their last four digits of their social security number or something like that, and understanding that we might get a lot of false hits under those circumstances because, that vendor wouldn't have all that information. But yeah, obviously you're focused on protecting member data, and that's great. I would hope that you keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thank you. I believe that's it for.
I'm sorry, Bobby, could I add one more thing to that I forgot that Johnny
I'm
should be
sorry.
kicking me under the table for? One of the other things when we were discussing this, because this did bring up robust discussions among leadership team, with our staff, on who we share data with, why do we share it, do we need to? But one of the things that Johnny brought up, and I need to find my notes, otherwise I'll say it wrong, is that part of the death match process as well is a recommendation from our tax council to use an outside vendor to meet IRS requirements on that SDCERS has to follow, that we don't pay people that are not entitled to get benefits. Did I say it right, Johnny?
Yes.
Thank you.
Last year, we went through a review of our tax program, and that was one of the recommendations. It's very common in the industry. We can't pay benefits to people who don't deserve them, who've passed away. And so that's something that the board adopted to use such a service. Now it's our job to make sure we're using that service safely and correctly.
Thanks, Bobby.
There was a circumstance reported in the paper in the last couple of weeks, a federal employee receiving over $800,000 of his mother's benefits for decades. So we thank you for your vigilance. I believe that's it for the oral reports. Ted, we heard yesterday that you're about to start your annual audit work, so we wish you good luck with all the changes. And there's a new report on our list here that comes from Johnny, your annual report for compliance. So it was very interesting to read, for me, to see all of the things that all of the departments and the department managers do on an annual basis. So it is very interesting to see the complexity of the organization and how well you have it covered. So thank you for that. Are there any questions from our committee? And Greg?
No, I was pointing to Chris.
Just questions, Marcel, on the overpayments and underpayments, and so this is 8 and 9 on the agenda. It's really helpful where you put the details in of what the reason for this was. I was just wondering what pensionable compensation cap means in terms of, that would be on,
Right, so that's
number
yeah,
8, I think.
Right, so there are a number of people on that list. So what happened here, it's a little complex. These are employees of the port that are under their PEPR plan. And when PEPR was implemented, it said that there were caps on the pensionable pay that could be considered in calculating a benefit. And so the system is to apply those caps and stop accepting contributions and stop recognizing pensionable pay once they hit those caps. However, the port is unique in that there was another provision of PEPR that said, if you have an existing plan in place and the normal cost of that plan is less than the normal cost of the PEPR plan, you get to keep your old plan, which is what the port did. They kept their old plan. That's where it gets very complex, because then there are some provisions of PEPR that apply and some provisions that don't apply. Unfortunately, we applied the provision on caps, which we should not have applied, because the pensionable pay is part of the normal cost. So we shouldn't have put that cap. So there were a dozen employees at the port that we were inappropriately capping their pensionable pay, which means that we were saying, you made X, but we're only going to acknowledge something less than that in calculating your benefit. We're only accepting contributions on something less than that. So when that was discovered, we worked very closely with the port. We identified these members, and through subsequent discussions with the port determined that they wanted to make those contributions on their behalf, and that has been done. The port has changed their software because their software was capping them, and then we have changed ours. And it was, again, a bit more challenging because this is only for the general PEPR members at the port. The safety PEPR members on the port are full, straight PEPR. So we've got actually 2 sets of rules on capping pensionable pay for PEPR members at the port. So that's the issue, and it has been resolved, and they will no longer be capped. So the result to these 12 members is they will receive a higher benefit because they will have higher pensionable pay used to calculate their benefit.
So, yeah, thank you. Really interesting that the port decided to cover those costs, because under a similar circumstance, I guess the city now would cover the interest or whatever, but not necessarily the loss on the part of the employee, correct?
Correct.
Under their current policy. So would this have to have been a board decision at the port, or do you have any idea how they make a decision like that?
This was a series of meetings that involved SDCERS legal counsel, Port legal counsel, outside tax counsel. There was a number of discussions, and it was considered at the executive level at the Port is where the decision was made. It did not have to go to their board, is my understanding, but it was definitely at the executive level at the Port that this decision was made after consulting with numerous experts.
Thank you. And Bobby, I just wanted to comment that this year, or I guess last year, state legislation was introduced and ultimately passed for CalSTRS retirees, that if a mistake is made by either CalSTRS or the plan sponsor, which I guess would be the school districts and so on, that going forward, either the plan sponsor or CalSTRS would cover the difference on that. From the perspective of somebody who represents retirees, that seems like a really good idea. And maybe the city council might consider taking that up at some point. But at least the interest is being waived. So, but it is interesting that we have different participants in our plan who are handling this in different ways. Thank you.
Any other comments? Greg?
Yes, I wanted to highlight that and thank Victoria for making the member services report out today. And you may notice the conspicuous absence of our wonderful Cynthia Queen, our member services director. I'm just very pleased to say that our action plan best practices for benefits administration project is nearing the finish line. And we're working very, very hard on that reengineering project, which looks from the beginning of the process to the end of the process, how that impacts our information systems, documentation and training. And Cynthia has graciously accepted the offer to, on the next 3 months, just to focus on that project and try to bring us to the finish line with regards to the part that impacts member services. So for the next 3 months, Cynthia is just focusing solely on that, which gives an opportunity for some of the member services team to step up and have a management training opportunity to fill in as our member services director. And I'm really pleased that Victoria is our first staff member to do that. And she will be followed then by Jessica Taylor. Hi, Jessica. But again, I just really wanted to thank both Victoria and Jessica for stepping up, and also for Cynthia Queen for dedicating all of her knowledge and trying to encapsulate that for the future success of our teams. Thank you.
Please tell her that we miss her and her enthusiasm.
I think she's watching, Bobby, so she probably heard you.
Any other comments? Yep. No? Then any closed session items, Johnny?
No.
Great. All right, then this meeting is adjourned and the time is 10:16.